In many gaming communities, there's a romanticized view that because players will consistently outdev the actual developers, if game companies would only incorporate player-generated content officially into the game and let the community run updates, then bug fixes and content updates would happen more frequently and be of higher quality. But how true is this really? To start, many games look to their community a lot, notably for things like balance and quality of life improvements. It can be useful for them to think of their players like the investors of a publicly traded company that they want to appease. Some games even have a dedicated balance council of a few dozen top players to make decisions, but most simply look at what their community is talking about online. However, actually using the community for bug fixes and player content like maps, weapons, items, etc. for the official game is more rare, and there are a few reasons why this isn't more common. Player-generated content can often be of poor quality. Even if something looks good, it can be poorly optimized or conflict with the game in some other area. This especially goes for community bug fixes, but also models and scripts. To that end, community contests and votes or workshop pages for the addition of something like cosmetics can be useful. They often don't align with the developer's vision for the game. Different games have varying levels of looseness with their setting and mechanics, and it's reasonable for developers to not want to give up that freedom and control. Dealing with the community over payment and inclusion into the game is precarious because there's no set structure. And if you're taking a more hands-on approach, you may be better off just doing the work yourself. It's also worth remembering that few games actually have modding scenes big enough to facilitate something like community-driven updates. And if your game does have a scene big enough for that, then it's not unlikely you'll run into these problems. If a specific modder or small team within the community is creating quality content that overlaps with your team's vision, you're better off just hiring them. Hiring talented community members is extremely common in the games industry, and the pipeline from modder to working at a game company is an increasingly viable pathway with so many modding tools for so many player bases. This is the most important one. Proper integration into the base game is rarely actually required for players to engage with community-made content. Mod support is commonplace and more than enough for nearly all offline and many online games. Co-op and PvP games will usually have some sort of client-side modding support. Alright, with that out of the way, this is the part of the video where I expressed that, despite saying earlier that it was rare, a lot of games still do harness their community's collective developmental energy on certain aspects of their game. It's just usually a much more top-down approach with a lot of oversight from the developers and not a whole lot of community input. Many games incorporate community maps, mods, weapons, skins, etc. into the base game, all to varying degrees of quality and reception from the player base. Here's a couple anecdotes to illustrate the earlier points. So Valve is notable for recognizing very early on their player base's potential.
10 times as much content comes from the user base for TF2 as comes from us.
Looking at just TF2, they had a few test runs before letting the community try and have a go at a full-scale update on their own. Bad idea. Long story short, it was a notorious disaster because there was a major disagreement in the community over how revenue should be handled with delays in the works, requiring Valve to step in. Afterwards, they tried again with a more top-down approach for TF2, with a set theme for an update and hand-picking themselves what would go in, which caused its own problems. And since then, it's almost exclusively been seasonal updates with Valve-picked community additions as far as content is concerned anyway. And at most, the community either collectively or from a few members creating a sub-theme for the season, like this offshore project we're seeing. But wait, because even now there's a bunch of drama llama stuff with what content they add and from who. Valve has since used their own Steam Workshop for other games, and Left 4 Dead 2 even had their own community-driven update, which as far as I know went well-ish. Importantly, Valve recently updated their Source SDK to include TF2's client and server game code, which is honestly what got me thinking about this video in the first place, because this is the ending point of mod support. This is it. Full, unlimited, supported access to the game. But in a weird way, it's almost the antithesis of developer content for the base game, which I know is a very spoiled thing to say, but I'm just saying how I feel. And I can't help but think that, while this is undoubtedly a positive for the game's longevity, and if we are getting a send-off, it is better this way, I wish things happened differently. So this is the situation of TF2's continued development. At most, there's a few guys in and outside of Valve still occasionally contributing to the game, working on patches and selecting which Emporium member gets a paycheck this summer. There's 3 cups a year of community content with a heaping tablespoon of drama mixed in, and we're at the ending point of mod support with full access and permission, but a game company that is so ambivalent to their game that it takes a petition of thousands of players to have a chance at allowing free-to-play players to call for medic. Man! Along with other examples of neglect. And the thoughts on the state of the game range from, "This is great, the game's 18 years old and Valve is facilitating official and unofficial content for the game, and without this there'd be absolutely nothing," to, "Fuck Valve, they're farming community content for the checks, matchmaking sucks, bots were rampant for years, weapons are still balanced like shit, seasonal cosmetics look like ass, and we haven't gotten a major update in nearly 9 years." I'll let you come to your own conclusion. Bethesda is also notable for their outspoken support of their modding scene. Oh shit, spoke too soon. In the past, they've facilitated and also hired modders.
We think that is just awesome. It's something that we've always supported. We're going to keep supporting. We've hired a large number of modders that are now professionals. We want to support the people who are doing it on their own so they can be professionals on their own.
Knowing this, in 2017, they rolled out their now infamous Creation Club, which I'm sure you're aware of. This was somewhere in between paid DLC and integrated mod support for consoles. The system was that integrated into their games, you could purchase the very creatively named Creation credits, with which you could purchase creations which were created by the community. What supposedly differentiated them from just paid mods was that they were curated by Bethesda. This was a very polarizing setup, and lots of people attacked the Creation Club because A, it was a waste of disk space, B, many of the paid mods, which is what I'm just going to call them, were of poor quality, and C, it was seen as Bethesda trying to make money off community content as they were pocketing 75% of the revenue from Creation credit sales, and this was mostly from console players. The arguments in defense of the system were A, modders deserve compensation and players are entitled. It's worth noting that mods of high quality can make a lot more than you'd probably expect from donations. B, regardless of the paywall, this is a way for console players to engage with community content, which for a long time has been a staple of Bethesda games that they just weren't able to tap into. C, Bethesda has a right to part of the money because it's their game. I admit this sounds greedy, but also remember many games like Roblox are pretty much built off community content and they take a lot of money from that. And D, these aren't paid mods because they're curated by Bethesda. Once again, I encourage you to form your own opinion. However, I will say that it was the general consensus then, and still is now, that regardless of intent, regardless of the curated aspect, this is a paywall in front of community mods that shouldn't exist, and community content shouldn't be integrated as paid DLC in this way. This experiment is especially interesting to me because in theory it is everything these people want. Community content in the base game. Modders are able to profit off of their hard work and players get more content. But it fails precisely because of the 5 reasons we talked about earlier. Despite being curated and costing money up front, it's often of poor quality. It often doesn't align with the original vision. Talking about payment and the price of these mods is just an endless amount of debate. These talented developers might be better off working for Bethesda proper, as they're very well known to hire. And of course, you don't need the content to be in the actual game to use it, and Bethesda games have historically had some of the most thriving modding scenes in gaming. So this was a bad rollout, there was a lot of backlash, and it was only a year prior to the disastrous launch of Fallout 76. You can make your memes about horse armor and say how they were the beginning of the microtransaction era of gaming, or you can make fun of the bland planets in Starfield, but specifically these 2 years, the paid integration of community content especially did more to damage the reputation in the gaming sphere of Bethesda than anything else. Wait, so you have to pay for the horse armor again? I thought it had all the DLC. Oh no, wait, yeah. So you get the original horse armor DLC in the base edition, but if you get the deluxe edition, you get even more horse armor.
Well fucking played, Bethesda. Okay, whatever.
Anyway, those are just a couple of anecdotes. There's of course more, but I'm fucking lazy and get the point by now. Alright, to wrap up, while developers look to their community a lot for their own content, and some find it useful to incorporate community-made content, it can often be more trouble than it's worth. It stirs up community drama, and there's rarely ever an actual need for it, because player content doesn't need to be incorporated into a game for it to be usable, at least on PC. So while it's of course fun, and I do admit it's very fun, to look at these community updates for our favorite games, fitted with weapons, cosmetics, animations, and the like, unfortunately, it's been proven it's just not worth it, and that's how it is.